Babies, my babies, how are we? What's going on? Today's video is decision fatigue and a new approach to the daily to-dos slash task slash schedule. And then I write basically in quotes, I was having some thoughts about what to name tasks. Okay, so this happened about 4 months ago. And if I follow the theory, well, all I have to do is compare how I was back then when it came to what I had to do and how I am right now the past 2, 3 months. Right now, we're at the end of August. It's probably written in April. Yeah, back then there was a frustration because there was abundance of things that I wanted to do, but approaching them was very much exhausting. And I think at that time I kind of like made a switch where I basically like I don't really like lay down what needs to be done in the form of over the next 3 months, but I actually lay it down in the form of like this needs to be done. Like I encompass like something. And that kind of like made it a lot easier for me to kind of like take the distributed tasks and fulfill them until it finishes. And I think I mentioned this in a video of some sort at some point. It was like a decision fatigue. So let's talk about decision fatigue a bit. Making a decision is effort. And I read a paper that like inherent on each one of us kind of has a certain limit. Everything's trainable, but has a certain limit of how many decisions they can do every day. And based on that limit, you kind of like become very exhausted and a lot more receptive. So yeah, so what happened was I realized that every single day I was like bombarded with a whole lot of decisions. And because every task required its own decision making process. And at one point I was like, because the same approach that I'm doing when I was earlier on, I think a year and a half ago, it's been over, yeah, a year and a half ago. Like in April 2022, when I started waking up every morning and walking, that was the only decision that was valid in my life that I had to do. And I remember when I started walking every day, it wasn't a decision to walk every day. It was a decision to contribute an allotted amount of time to the universe, cosmic energy, God, whatever it is. Like, I looked at myself in a very selfish perspective for so long, in a very arrogant, self centered, and egotistical perspective for so long. And it's always I. And it took me a while, but I stood there one day and I was like, who the fuck am I? And if I want something, somebody's gonna give it to me. What's the exchange of value that's happening? And that allowed me to heavily reflect on myself and heavily just like consider. It's like I have value to give, right? But is it substantial? Is it an amount that's relevant to what I want? And I think at that point, man, some gratitude came into place because I was like, at least I'm alive. That means I can do something, which means I am grateful. But this life so far has been free. It's been given to us for free. But the truth is, living is not free because living kind of like requires you to input into life in order for you to be living. And at that point, I realized that if anything, man, the whole like nature of things, the magic that always is happening around us, the elements that make up my reality, that shared reality, everything that's just like beautiful about this world, never actually what's the price to pay for it, and what's the value we're contributing to it. And at that point, I made because it was a hard decision. I for me was to wake up, to just wake up early. It's just like I just couldn't do it. And then I realized that the decision is not to wake up early. The decision is to kind of walk the minute I wake up. And the walk was not for me, was that 1 hour that's given to the universe. That's why I call it the universal walk. That's me basically paying my dues. And I remember it took 3 days to 5 days before I started waking up at 7 on my own, simply because it was too hot at 11 o'clock. And gradually, day by day, I'd wake up earlier. And the minute I wake up, I just leave the house and I go for the walk. And within 5 days, I was waking up by 6, 7. Such a beautiful feeling. And that kind of like was the first major decision I did, but it had nothing to do with me. The decision was for something so fucking big that any feeling I have had was so small in comparison to it. And then later on, I basically like I adapted to a few things, but still, like, there's always glitches, right? Like, you're like, I can do this more efficiently. I would want to do this differently. Oh, I want to experiment with this. Like, you're kind of like maneuvering things and you're exploring yourself in the process. So 4 months ago, I was like kind of like trying to set tasks, and I'd set tasks and I'd do them, but it's exhausting. And I didn't like it because I don't think anything you do is should be exhausting. Should be energy consuming, yes. But ultimately, like doing tasks, you should get better at doing tasks, not the task itself. Because it seems like anytime you're set and you have like I have to do this, there's a whole lot of focus, there's a whole lot of intensity coming from you. And when you're done, it's kind of like it all comes out. And at that point, I kind of like realized there's something off about it. And I think that's where I started saying I had started connecting with like, you don't have to do something, you want to spend time with it. Because it becomes like, yeah, we can do this in an hour, but chances are the next time you want to do this, it's going to take an hour. Because technically you're grinding. You're not really allowing yourself an understanding that creates a flow. It's funny how flow is always like this. It's not never a straight line. And so what happened was I just here the decision fatigue and a new approach to the daily to-dos task slash schedule. And what hit me was it's really just not the to-dos or tasks because they themselves were a decision to do. But if I take a step back, or at the very least, I kind of like take a step vertically to kind of see a three-dimensional scope instead of a two-dimensional scope. What happened was I realized that these tasks lead to something. So the decision to do that one thing is counted as one decision. And it's funny, because read about it. There's a scientific paper about it somewhere. You can Google it. Maybe I'll find it and put it under this like video. I've sucked at this stuff, by the way, like linking you to like resources. But ultimately, what happened was making a decision that's like 2 months down the line really just accumulated all the tasks, especially the mundane ones that needed to be done on the spot. And they, all different kinds of tasks and to-dos, became like a decision that I make in the day, contributing to the bigger decision I make later. And the fun part about it is like I no longer feel exhausted when I'm actually like doing the things that I need to do. Simply because I'm not the one deciding upon them. They're coming up as the decision that needs to be made, simply because I imagined, visualized, or kind of like intentionally made one whole kind of like directional decision, you might want to say, uh, visionary decision. That's a bit sounds conceited, but it kind of seems that way. Like I want this to be done, and so every decision leading to it is already made, and it's not by me. It's by whatever I actually gave that energy to. So my days were have become a lot more small. I have a lot more energy to spend, even when I code, even when I'm intense, even when I drink way too much coffee. Even when I exercise hard, or even when I write, I don't get exhausted anymore, simply because they're really just like there's an empty moment for this now, and I just like follow through. Huh, it's a good piece of reflection right there. There is a beauty in surrendering, I'm not going to lie. There is a beauty in acknowledging that you're insignificant. There's a beauty that in acknowledging your failure from the beginning. The possibility of failure, if you want to call it that way, but like it is easier if you imagine yourself failing and doing stuff that don't contribute to it, instead of imagining yourself succeeding and arrogantly, basically, taking charge when you have no idea what you're doing. And if I was to leave this video on a positive note, I'd be like, why do you have to do what you want to do now? And if it makes sense to any of you, don't create the end result. Just gonna create the setup of which you would like of which you would like to be present in this real world, in this world that we share, and basically trust that it will be done based on your movements, and allow the decisions to come to you on their own. It really is a blissful sensation. It really is just an awkward way of approaching life because, in all honesty, man, our opinion really only matters within the scope of us. And it's funny because it's almost every single thing we want to do is outside of us, but it requires us to be at a level that increases our scope. So this is a video. Love you.